Hello, I'm Charles Clapsaddle, Station Manager for Manatee Educational Television, and welcome to the Education Report. Today's program is the first in a special series of programs that will discuss the values, the challenges, and the responsibilities of our county's school system and how they're being met. We know that a stable and successful school system is the backbone of any community. It is the system to which we entrust our most precious asset, our children. In Manatee County, our school district is entrusted with the education of over 46,000 children. Our school district employs nearly 5,000 people and has a budget of over $500 million. These factors alone require diligence, integrity, and commitment. And to say that our school district has experienced some turmoil is quite the understatement. However, there are indicators that our school district is on a path to success and accountability. And to talk about these wide variety of issues that are facing our district, we're very privileged to have with us today a very distinguished, knowledgeable, and informed panel. Let's meet them now. Joining us today are Tom Tryon, the opinion editor for the Sarasota Herald Tribune. Welcome, Tom, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Summer Smith, the reporter and anchor for Bay News 9. Summer, it's so nice to see you again.
It's a pleasure, thank you.
Dennis Maley, the editor-in-chief for the Bradenton Times. Dennis, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Charles.
And Chris Willey, the editorial page editor for the Bradenton Herald. I want to thank you all for joining us. I'd like to begin with Chris. And Chris, you recently had the opportunity to interview Superintendent Mills and his two deputy superintendents, Dr. Diana Green and Don Hall, as well as the chair of the Manatee County School Board, Julia Ranabar. What were the key factors that you found in that interview?
Well, they're working very hard and diligently to try to reverse the budget problems that they've had. And they've made a remarkable recovery, $17 million worth over just the past year. And they're projecting an $11 million surplus next year, which would bring it right in line with state guidelines on budget reserves. So I think that they've brought a lot of fiscal responsibility to a district that hasn't had much of that for years. They're still finding problems, including a $6 million plus misspent on a bond program from 2009. So, there's still these landmines that they've got to traverse, but, I think they're headed in the right direction, and the recent FCAT scores show that the education standards are rising and students are achieving more. So I think that Mills and his staff have done very, very well in the past year, despite criticisms from some quarters.
And I think during that interview process where you had the opportunity to interview the staff along with Dr. Prosfield, who participated, they were very forthright and ongoing and upfront about there are challenges ahead.
There are challenges ahead, and the financial picture is still a bit murky. The audits there's still more auditing to do, and Lord knows what those are going to uncover. Hopefully, nothing really bad. But they're going in a very positive, good, solid direction, I think.
Thanks, Chris. Now, Tom, I'd like to turn my attention to you. You're a longtime Manatee County citizen. You went to school here, Palmetto High, was it?
Yeah, 1976, actually. Graduated.
1976.
Long before summer.
You've seen changes in the school district. You've seen, things that have succeeded and things that have failed miserably. What is your take? What is your impression of this school district as it moves forward?
I'd put the challenges kind of into four groups. One is budget, one's academic, one is politics, and one is kind of morale, climate. I'll start at the end. The morale climate issue, I'm very concerned about. Of course, when you have serious budget problems, it's going to affect your organization in many ways. You put on top of that what I would call the meddling of the legislature and the Board of Governors, always nothing but mandates, state control. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what you're not going to do. We're doing Common Core. Oops, we're not doing Common Core.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a professional working under those circumstances, you're not going to be happy. Now, all that said, I think there's some real questions about whether the current administration's management style is helping matters at all or making things worse. I wrote a column recently about my thought would be is that this would really be a good time for some sort of a climate survey, very anonymous, very professional, done district-wide. So that's a huge concern for me. When you have teachers who are unhappy, that's not good for the classroom. You got the politics. Obviously, incumbents are being challenged. I think they're clearly being challenged as a way to challenge the administration. I'm not sure we've had one of those kinds of elections in a long time in Manatee. The third thing is academic. Chris mentioned some progress on FCAT. That's encouraging. But if you look at Manatee, particularly if you compare to Sarasota, some different demographics, yes. More money because Sarasota has extra tax. But the comparisons are not very favorable to Manatee. The third thing, again, is the budget. As Chris mentioned, it has been, and that's where, I would not envy this administration at all. And it's been very difficult. So, I think these things need to be taken in increments and steps. Right. But I think everybody needs to recognize that there really are kind of four main areas at work here.
Well, these elements, they all kind of work together, though. I mean, if you have, fiscal turmoil, that's going to affect everything. And I think the fiscal turmoil that affected every department, every school, every area of the district. And I see there are indicators that fiscal responsibility is kind of coming back and being kind of a steady hand.
Yeah, and the last thing I would just add, we just went through the Great Recession. Very few businesses, and I know, a fair amount of teachers, we haven't had raises. Well, you know what? A lot of other people haven't had raises either. This was an unprecedented economic deterioration in Florida in particular. So, that exacerbated things. And so you had, structural budget problems with a recession. That's not a good outcome.
And unfortunately, the district, suffered at these hands. Summer, you're out there every day. You're out in the schools. You're reporting on things that are happening each and every day. What's your impression of the district? And you've grown up here. You went to school here. Things have certainly changed since you were in school. But tell us what your impression is.
Another Palmetto alum too. So I was happy to hear that. It's a lot of negative. We hear a lot of negative, but what I'm always so pleasantly surprised to see is I have a son who's entering the second grade, and his teachers and the administration at his school are outstanding, always positive, and no matter what, they all do feel, I have friends that are teachers, and they want raises. We all want raises. So I see where they're coming from, and sometimes I think, oh, they're so lucky, they get their summers off, they get Christmas off. We don't get that, we don't get the raises, but when you're dealing with 20 children, in a class, I'm around my kids all day and with their friends, and it's draining. So they're definitely earning their money. But I have never felt like the education was failing. My son receives a top-notch education, kindergarten and first grade, and I feel like that will continue despite whether or not they get a raise. Speaking to the administration, teachers in different schools, janitors, whoever it is, everyone I deal with is pleasant, positive, and they want the best for this district. And I do feel like the administration is heading in the right direction. I always say when people find it, fault in it, well, can you balance your checkbook if you were negative in one day, or if you've ever had bills to pay? Were you able to pay them off in 1 month? No. It took time. You have to budget, you have to change your life around. And unfortunately, that's just what our students, teachers, staff are having to deal with. But I do think it will change. I'm very optimistic, and being that I have my children here in the school system, I would pull them out if I didn't feel that way.
Well, that's an excellent point. Now, Dennis, you've participated in a lot of school-related issues. You have a son in the schools, very successful son in the schools. What's your take, not only as from your point of view, but also as a father as well?
Well, I'd echo what Summer said about there are great things happening in our schools, and we're very lucky to have excellent, dedicated teachers and staff within the schools. But to speak a little bit to what Tom said, there's definitely a lot of, I don't know if I want to say misplaced, but at least warranted frustration that people don't know where to direct it. If you look at it and you say, I'm a teacher, I'm a principal in the district, and I didn't benefit from any of the financial malfeasance that got us here, and now I'm suffering for it. I'm being told we can't invest in this, we can't give you these resources. You're going to be angry. I don't think anybody knows where to direct that. It's also a very confusing and complicated issues. When you look at school district budgeting, that's one of the most complex financial things that you'll ever delve into. People are still saying in the community and in the schools, who stole the money? Who's in Aruba with the checking account? There's a lot of failure to understand exactly what happened and what's continuing to happen. So when you keep getting more bad news and you hear, well, 7.2 more million that has to be restored, going all the way back to 2005. And then you hear, oh, this bond issue from 2009, over $6 million of it misspent. We don't know what that's going to do yet. Now we've got an audit coming up this summer with MTI, and we might have some problems there. So you keep getting bad news, and you're saying, what's happening? I thought we were fixing things, but I keep hearing and really what you're doing is you're picking up more rocks to fix things and realizing it's like an old car. You go to fix one part and you realize 3 to connect to it are broken. So there's a lot of just general frustration saying, when is this going to get better? But when you look at those numbers that Chris talked about, they're incredibly impressive. So I think that was the idea. I was there when they hired Superintendent Mills, and I think when you looked at those 20-some candidates that were qualified for the position, they said the very first thing we need to do is get someone who has the financial and budget wherewithal to dive into this. And when you look at those numbers and that turnaround, and then say we've had the highest standardized test that we've had in more than half a decade during that time, it's pretty hard to argue that that's not success.
And
at least a reasonable amount of success, what you could expect under these circumstances.
And I would suggest to all of you that, as success comes to the school district, it's very noteworthy because they're anxious to show that we're moving ahead, anxious to show that academics are improving, anxious to show that their IB program is working, that their AP program is working. They're anxious to show that because in schools you have, as Summer mentioned, talented, committed, dedicated individuals. And that's really important to show that success. Now, one of the things that Tom mentioned, and I want to spend a few minutes on that, is that perception of, things are low in the morale area. For me, personally, I've had a wide variety of different bosses, throughout my career. And everybody does things differently. Everybody has a different perception, when they come into a job. Well, is this guy going to be the right person for the job, or are they going to take my feelings into consideration? It's a change in leadership. And sometimes leadership, doesn't always correspond with the rank and file of people, but it's that change in leadership. Do you think that, that difference rankles people, or do you think it's something that's just an initial change that gradually will change over time? Chris?
Well, I think Rick Mills brought a strict disciplinarian approach to management. He's got a military background, and he's a no-nonsense kind of guy. And he came with the idea of changing the political landscape within the school district and rooting out the good old boy network and establishing a more fair and impartial system where people are rewarded for good work and not because of who they know or who they're going to give favors to. And that rankled a lot of people, and they're fighting back. And I think that's probably a large portion of the discord that we're hearing now. I wonder how widespread that discord is. I question that. And I think Tom's spot on with the idea that, let's do a teacher survey and find out those answers and see how widespread the problem is. I think that's a very, very solid point, and I think that the district is going to pursue that.
And I find that very distracting to see this going on. As a resident and mother of children in the school district, they have enough issues with the budget that I find that very disappointing to see when I hear, just let him do his job. He's going to do it differently, or because it's ridiculous what you're hearing is going on. And it's grown men, grown women arguing, and I'm always very disappointed when I hear these stories.
Tom, you've seen, you've had your finger on the pulse here in Manatee County, for in a variety of different things. But you're really connected with the schools. And you have an abiding affection, I think, for Manatee County and the schools here. And does it disappoint you to see that perhaps that there's not enough kind of coming together between administrators and staff, perhaps?
Yes, and I think I think there are a couple of things at work here. One is some of the political machinations. We're hearing stuff like some school board members from out east got elected, and they've been trying to destroy Manatee High School. I mean, you hear that kind of stuff. So I think you have that pile, that pot, so to speak. But then I think you have some others where, if you remember, it wasn't so long ago that schools were being decentralized. We had school advisory committees, that were engaged in the management, literally in the management of schools. And so, you had that experiment. You had teachers and administrators getting used to that. But now it's a military-style organization. It's very top-down driven, and in fact, that kind of complements what the state has been doing. Okay, here's the curriculum. Here's what we're going to test. Here's what you're going to teach. Here's the books you're going to use. And I think you have that degree. So yeah, that's alarming. But I think what concerns me the most is the lack of cohesive support in the community for the school district. When they had looked at raising, I think it was the quarter-mill tax. Right. Good Lord, you thought it was Armageddon. Really. Now, some of the opponents may have been right to the point that the school district was not entirely spending money correctly. But, I don't want to say it's this Tea Party impact, but this is very negative. We don't want to spend. We had candidates 4 years ago saying, why should teachers get benefits? I don't have benefits. Well, I'm sorry you don't have benefits, but geez, responsible employers give their, employees benefits. This is part of the deal. And so that probably worries me more than anything. For better and for worse, for years and years you had a very steady administration, you had steady school boards, and you had this sense of ownership, I thought. And I'm discouraged that away from individual schools, I think there's, as you mentioned, there's some very incredible bright spots. But I think as a community, there is just not that we're going to rally around the kids. And I just don't feel that on a countywide basis, and that worries me the most.
And I think perhaps if that perception, I think that stems from that financial meltdown that perhaps the school board went through. I think that's part of it.
I think it's part of it, but I really did sense it was brewing before that, and particularly I think when you compare it to Sarasota, which I watch, where you've had 4 times in a row, the voters have overwhelmingly, about 60% or more, voted to tax themselves an additional mill. The dynamics, the tenor of the discussion are entirely different than they are here. And that was even before the budget crisis.
And that's true.
And I think our community better support it. I'm shocked that they don't, because that's our future. We hear that over and over again, but why wouldn't we? Don't you want these children to succeed? But the big complaint I keep hearing from people why they don't support it is because some people left with such a huge amount of money. And they feel like, why should I give the district money when they let the people that caused that leave with such a significant amount of money? No matter how you feel, it's just that's the common complaint I keep hearing. But a half-cent tax, we can't afford that, I think the community really needs to rally together.
And I think also, that, as you're talking about that perception there, is that, there's a lot of things that are happening within the school district that perhaps, are great indicators of perhaps future success, but they don't seem to have that kind of resonance, perhaps, that other things have done. For example, this year, for the first time in a long time, 4 out of the 7 high schools are A grades, which is really significant. I think Manatee County was the first to come to the table with the teachers union for the pay increase, for the state-funded pay increase. These are significant achievements, and there's more as well, but they don't seem to have that kind of resonance, perhaps, of successes, that kind of lingering doubt and perhaps uncertainty. So, Dennis?
I think that morale is always going to be low when you're failing. And the reality is we're failing, and we've been failing. And we were failing when we were spending money that we didn't have. So there's a credibility issue when you go to the community and say, look, we've been spending tens of millions of dollars that we didn't have, and we were 47th out of 67 districts in the county, or excuse me, the state. We went to you before and said, we're going to raise starting salaries for teachers to $38,000, which brought us to 4th in the state. So 4th out of 67, right? Our investment per student was in the top 5th, and we were in the bottom 3rd performance-wise. So morale is always going to be bad when you're failing. It's like a losing team when they get a new coach. So I think when Mr. Mills came in and said, listen, I'm not really interested in how we were doing things because 1, we didn't have the money to do them that way,
right.
And 2, we weren't doing well anyway, and we're going to change things. That's going to shake things up, and a lot of people are upset by that. You know, when you look at it, I think we were also set up for failure in a lot of different ways. Our district was, let's face it, a quasi-patronage system. We did not make good decisions on who went into administration, who got high 5 and 6-figure salaries. There was a lot of time, your relationship with other people in administration, there was no rule on family relations or anything like that. That was instituted by Mr. Mills in his first month to say, hey, listen, we have a nepotism policy.
The nepotism,
yeah,
favoritism.
we didn't even know that somebody's daughter-in-law or what have you, and they're working underneath them. When you look at those things and say, listen, we got to cut all that out. Of course, people are going to say, well, I don't like that. I liken it to a situation if you've got a household and one person's in charge of the budget and they say, sure, let's buy whatever you want. You want to have pizza every night? You want to go to Disney World on the weekend? Break out the credit card. Then the other parent gets the bill, the collection notices start coming in and saying, well, we got to change things. Well, who are the kids going to like more? You know what I mean? They're going to say, well, I really like the way things were before. So when I hear discord, I hear we don't do this anymore. Well, we can't, and that's the problem, and we've got to get better. And it's going to be tough when you have to come in and make cuts and get better at the same time. But when I look at things and say, where are we doing better? Look at the Title I results. That was our biggest turnaround. When you look at students who are in poverty and coming in and doing better, that's pretty impressive when you're cutting funding. We hired Dr. Diana Green, the superintendent of curriculum. Phenomenal. I've sat down and talked with her in the beginning about what her game plan was, and then talked about the tests on how they got there. And I have never, ever had a conversation with somebody at that level in this school district on the metrics they're going to use to measure their success. And that's somebody who came from a district, Marion County, that has way more Title I students than we do and was 10 spots above us on the state rankings. So we're doing some right things. They might be strong medicine, in a sense, for some people to handle, but it's going to probably still get worse before it gets better. That's the part we have to be realistic about.
And I think, I'm glad you mentioned the Title I because it's a serious issue, throughout the state of Florida, but, there was work to be done on the Title I issue here in Manatee County. There were serious problems with Title I schools, and there has been some vast improvements across the board with new curriculum, new efforts being made. So I'd like to move a little bit aside, and we brought that up, into the academic aspect of it. As we mentioned, the high schools are getting A grades. There's an increase in graduation rates. However, the academics, as Chris mentioned, needs something to be concentrated on. What are those areas that you see, that you would like to see, is, in your opinion, that the school district needs to concentrate on? And is it early learning? Is it pre-K? What are those key indicators that are going to help academics? Chris, what do you think?
Well, I think the emphasis on pre-K is very important. All the educators will tell you that if you've got to get kids involved early and get on that learning curve. And every children's advocacy group in the state pushes that, and it's very, very important to get pre-K into everywhere. As to some of the other things, Dr. Green stated in one of our articles that it's very unusual to move more than 1 or 2 percentage points ahead on standardized test scores. And we've got schools here that moved 7 percentage points in grades 3 to 5 math and 5 percentage points in 5th grade science. That's a really strong indicator of success. And I think part of that is Dr. Green and Rick Mills and his team are stressing academics. They're doing metrics on all students. They're following all students through the system, and they can see when there's a weakness. And if there's attendance that's dropping or if there's scores that are dropping, they will focus on that individual students, and teachers have to report all that. So they're gaining a metric that they never had before. And that's the key, is you're going to follow all your students. Teachers need to report all that, and it's obviously paying off now.
Well, which was one of the key things that you bring up is that, Mr. Mills on many occasions has said that, he's going to be, influenced by data that comes back from the schools at every level, to see how his decisions and his curriculum and his team, goes forward. So that data that's coming back from, schools is being analyzed at the school level, at the district level, to see what best efforts could be put forward.
Right, and they're bringing students' scores up, obviously, and the graduation rates have been up too, which is significant.
Well, also, I think one of the key programs that the Manatee has really embraced, and it's very successful, is the AP and the IB program itself. The IB program has proven to be very successful and is really an indicator of the quality and the caliber of teachers that you have in Manatee County, and I think that's very impressive. But aside from academics, there are many at-risk children throughout the schools. We're talking Title I, and then there's a whole thing with the Horizon. Those need added emphasis, from a school district of any size, to make sure that those children do not fall through the cracks, or that there's not that gap that's being done. What more can be done, in your opinion, Tom, to help that at-risk population?
I would point to third grade reading. If I had to look at any single factor, that's where I would look. And from what I'm reading and hearing is actually, there's some discussion now about moving that even lower. Is third grade too late? If you don't have successful reading by third grade, you may not get it at all. And I think that's one of the things where I go to thinking about where the community can help. There are some significant programs being developed by community foundations and other organizations. The Aspen Institute in Colorado has this really cool generational program where they work not only with students but with their parents. And Alta Vista, I'll just mention in Sarasota, has done this incredible job. And the Community Foundation has rallied, and they've done training for parents, job training, job referrals, et cetera, et cetera. And it has made a significant improvement. And I think for Manatee, if there's one challenge for the community specific, I think there's the overall, we need to rally behind the school district, a sense of ownership. But I think the other thing is the private sector is going to have to invest in a significant way in money and people and talent to focus on the at-risk kids. And I'll just, before I close on that, it's, a friend of mine, he was a lawyer, and he was essentially a family law, and he got tired of being in the middle, and he went to teach high school. And he said the first thing he learned is, the smart kids will do fine. It's the kids in the middle and who need the most help. And he said, a community should help those kids, because those are the kids who are going to be sheriff's deputies, paramedics. They're going to be taking your blood and all those things where you have in contact.
And they're least likely to leave the community.
Yeah, they're the least likely. They're going to stay. The smart kids, unfortunately, many of them are going to go away, and they'll be fine. So that would be my thing. I think there needs to be a very concerted private sector effort to supplement what the schools can do and get in and work and make raising the third grade reading level a community-wide goal.
That's an excellent point. This summer, you're a mom, and you're a busy working woman. How would you like to see the schools, increase their efficiency? What would you like to see, happen for your child?
Well, I think Chris and Tom both hit on it early. As having a young children, I see that you have all different levels. For example, in kindergarten, you have kids that come in that don't know their colors, don't know their numbers, don't know their letters. Then you have some that are already reading in kindergarten, and they're mixed. There's nothing they can do about that, and they think the higher ones bring out the best in the lower. But I feel like getting that emphasis on reading and making them love it, you know, and getting those volunteers maybe in to read with them a little more where the teacher can't handle 25 students, or it's lower than that, 19 to 20. But,
Right.
you know, and maybe trying to get that, because I think if we show and encourage that love of reading from an earlier age, I think they're more likely to pick up on it. And if they're failing, they're going to stay behind that whole time, going into second, going into third by FCATs. And it's just, it's a balancing act, but yeah, we need to do more earlier on, I think, to instill that love of learning so they want to achieve and they're satisfied with it.
As a mom, year-round school, would you like to have year-round school?
Actually, I always thought, you know, when I was in school, no way, but now I'm worried about what are they going to forget, you know, during the summer. And my son's teacher sent home books that we're going to have to do. So I would support it, maybe with different breaks, you know, throughout it. But I definitely think we've got to keep it going, keep their minds going, because use it or lose it.
There's a national thought on this as to be year-round schools, because globally, you know, in countries around the world, you know, there are year-round schools.
It's an antiquated leftover of our agrarian past. That's the only reason it's there, so kids could help with the harvest. And we do see statistically a huge drop-off. And any educator will tell you that the difference between June and September is profound. So I think that's a no-brainer. And also, it would help respect the modern economy, in which it's a huge strain on most families to take their kids out of school where they're learning and then pay to put them into a private care facility in most cases, especially on the lower end. So I think there's a great argument for year-round schooling on different levels.
I want to agree with the point that Tom and Summer made, that reading is so very, very fundamental and critical. And we do need to start, you know, teaching that stronger, and pre-K is an important part of that. Mm-hmm. You know, when Florida has a problem with high school graduates going on to college, and they got to take remedial courses because they just don't have the skills necessary. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's hard to comprehend, that reading, that we can somehow fail these kids on the reading level. That we shouldn't be.
Well, as you move through, you know, and you get into grade school, you know, there seems to be a greater emphasis as well on STEM, which is science, technology, and math. This is a critical factor, both at the college level, high school, this emphasis on STEM. Do you think that the school district is doing enough to kind of reinforce the science, technology, engineering, and math capacities? Anybody?
I think we're doing a great job of that. I think on the high end, we're very progressive. My son was in the AMP program. He was in the pilot class for that, for profoundly gifted kids. It was a phenomenal experience. He's starting another one at a middle school this year. It's another pilot program for gifted children. We're doing great things with the highest resources. I'll give you an analogy, an example. I'm involved with the Kiwanis Every Child a Reader program. Mm-hmm. I did 2 schools this year. One of them was Orange Ridge Bullock, one of the most poverty-challenged schools in our district. The other one was McNeil Elementary School, one of the highest income median in our district. I went into McNeil, this is VPK, every single kid could read. Every single one in the room, 20-some kids, every single one could read. Went into Orange Ridge Bullock, not a one. Now you look at that and you say, what's going to happen? Like Tom said, by third grade, forget about it. A kid reading early has been shown to be the #1 predictor of their success. When people ask me, hey, you've got a very successful child, what would you attribute to it? He could read by the time he was 3. Everything else is so much easier because they can understand words, they can pick up things in their surroundings, they can hear things on television, adult conversations that other children glaze right over. So if we could be more successful just reading, Sarasota uses the YMCA and a volunteer reading program where volunteers from the community can come in and read for a couple hours a week with these challenged students. We have at our disposal a phenomenal community. When you look at some of the retirees we have down here, when you go to some of the county commission or the school board meetings and you see retired PhDs, when you see retired CEOs, intelligent, educated people who want to help because they look at it and they say, listen, I pay taxes here and I've got the school, I don't own a business, I'm not really going to leverage any of this directly, but I want to help. We need, I think, to leverage that resource a little bit better.
And I think that's something, as Summer?
I was just going to say, like it or not, you're bringing up a good point, because I hear a lot of teachers say, well, it's the parents. You're right, it is the parents. Mm-hmm. And how lucky for the students that have the parents that go home and read with them. And I get home at 7 o'clock at night and I force my son to do homework until 8 or 9. We're up a little later. But if I didn't force him, he wouldn't do it and he would be behind. You can't pick your parents, though. So those poor children that don't have that support at home, they need the help. you're not going to force parents to do that. So that outside help, and that's
And I think
the
that's
way
an
it is.
increased awareness too, to reach out, to maybe a single parent home, to create that kind of sense of responsibility that perhaps, if you could spend 15 or 20 minutes a day reading to your children, the return on that would be terrific. I'd like to change gears here for a minute and talk a little bit about governance and management. And talk about building a trusting, kind of a productive relationship with the board, with the school board. The school board is the policy shaper for the Manatee County School District. The superintendent is the employee of the school board. I think the school board has the authority to hire the superintendent and the
board
attorney,
attorney and the
a board
auditor.
attorney and an auditor. I think those are the, and then do devise policy. But that superintendent and the school board have to work very closely in cooperation. What are your perceptions on that kind of cooperation, that kind of productive relationship, which is really an important asset to have in any school district? Anyone?
Well, I think that for the most part, the school board does have a very constructive relationship with Rick Mills. Most of them meet with him regularly and just one-on-one, and they can talk about policy and that sort of thing. I think part of the problem is when you get micromanagement into the situation, where a school board member might, be telling district administrators' employees what to do, and that's not policy decision. That's just micromanaging, and that should cease. That has been a problem in the past. I'm not sure how prevalent it is today, but there are issues on the school board for sure. And as we've seen with the candidates running for office now, who's to say that that's not even going to get worse? So.
And I would suggest to you, the school board, everyone comes to those meetings with the mandate that they want to do the best possible thing for the school district from their, from their point of view. You see during this financial turmoil that, the school board worked very closely together, to increase accountability, to increase transparency, and I think that's more so now than it ever has been, and that was a key element of that board coming together.
In the past, several of the most sharpest critics of the district would bring me spreadsheets and talk to me about spending, questionable spending and all that, and it turned out they were correct. Now they're very much in favor of the new direction of the school district, and so they're supporters now. They're not critics, and they want to see the school district succeed, as everybody else does too.
I mean, I think, one thing just as a raw politics, I think that Mr. Mills overplayed his hand on the his recent request to extend his contract by 2 years instead of 1 year, and some other, components. And, that did not fly with the board. And, I think if you were looking for any types of, are there any fault lines or anything, they may have been exposed a little bit there. I think what Chris had mentioned earlier, I think, this next election really will be a referendum essentially on the superintendent and his administration. So, school board members I found over time, they are pretty good at reading the public, generally speaking. I think if there are close votes, or maybe if you get one challenger who wins and maybe one who doesn't, those relationships may, start to become a little bit more frayed, because it's a very delicate, relationship between, a board and a superintendent. So I'm not sure we know the outcome yet.
And let me add to that. I think you're right that it's going to be a referendum, but I don't think it's going to be an informed or even an intentional one. I think the result will be it'll be a referendum. One of the things that was asked in that contract extension was, right now, the superintendent has a very odd contract in that he can be dismissed with 30 days' notice with a simple 3-2 vote of the board without cause. That's almost unprecedented. So when you look at that and you say, one shift on the board and you could be gone, that really takes what's been a remarkable recovery and makes it very unstable. So I think people won't realize when they're voting that you might be changing the whole team, because the Mills goes and probably the whole leadership team goes, and now we're back at square one again. And I don't think people will be voting with that in mind. So when you look at that and you say, there were people that said, no, we still want to be able to just have 3 votes and tell you goodbye. Not have to show that there's any cause whatsoever. So what they asked for, they said, how about if it's just a lack of faith, it requires a unanimous vote of the board. If it's 3-2, then it requires cause. So that's interesting. But let me also say that when it comes, I've heard this over and over, that we need more cohesiveness, that they need to be aligned. I don't agree with that at all, and I'll tell you why. I don't see our community that way. We're every local, state, nationally, we're very contentious. We have very different philosophies, we have very different ideas. And for a long time, the school board was rubber stamp, and it was 5-0, 5-0, 5-0, and that's how we got more than almost $30 million in the hole right now. When people started asking questions, and we cover all these governments, I'll tell you what, the ones that go 5-0 and the meeting's over in 45 minutes, that's where the corruption gets through. That's where the backroom deals get through. The ones where they go 5-2 and 6-1, and that's why opponents work so hard to get rid of that one vote on the county commission or something that goes against the fray, because it exposes other ideas. You don't just get to slip things under the radar. So I'm kind of happy when I see 3-2 votes and 4-1 votes, because it shows me that probably is more reflective of the community. I doubt we all agree exactly how we should move forward, so it's probably better represented when we have a better mix.
Well, obviously, the board makeup has changed considerably over the last few years, and in the next year or so, it may change again. But I see a kind of an increased cooperativeness. I think that Mr. Mills works very closely with the school board people to keep them informed, to keep them knowledgeable, and to provide them with information that helps them in their decision making. So that has absolutely been kind of a factor as we move forward. I think people are very well informed on the school board now, for the most part. I want to take a few minutes now and kind of go around the table, and I'll start with you, Tom. What do you see as the greatest challenges moving forward in perhaps the next 2 to 3 years for this district?
Get through the elections. And then I think you'll have a clearer sense of where things are headed. I think there's, as I mentioned, the 3rd grade reading, the challenges with some of the demographics, and as we mentioned, I mean, this is a very segregated school system demographically, by and large. So I think that's a big challenge: is how do you direct resources, while maintaining accountability and demanding accountability. I think rebuilding community trust is huge, and I still think that that your staff, your teaching staffs, your school building administrators are going to have to feel like they are engaged, that their opinion counts, and that everything is not top down. Because over time, I just don't think that's going to work.
Summer, what about you? What do you think those big challenges out there that are coming up?
I still think the budget is huge. I don't think people are going to breathe a sigh of relief until they hear that we're in the clear. We're good. Let's give teachers a raise. And then that's the other issue. Teachers, I just think we're losing some really good educators because they're sick of it. They're tired of working without the raises. They're long hours. They're putting in for those students that are behind, that they don't get the help at home. They work at a school where they don't have the parent support or community support. And it's trying times, and I've seen a lot of people leaving and choosing to go in a different career route. So I'm worried about the quality of education in the future. I say I'm happy with it, but I do worry, because I think, gosh, why would anyone want to go into this if you keep hearing all this negative talk about it? And we have some good educators that might decide to do something else instead.
What about you, Dennis? What
I
are
think
those
what we're all saying
challenges?
is whether or not we're going to have the will and the endurance to get through this turnaround. When you look at it, you say we're looking at between a $20 to $30 million turnaround in a couple of years in a failing district that was 47th out of 67. That's not going to be easy any way you do it. So I think there's going to be an appetite for somebody to say, they're doing it wrong. It doesn't have to be this painful. It doesn't have to be this hard. We can fix it tomorrow. And hey, if somebody has an idea on how to fix those kind of systemic problems that quickly, I'm all ears, but I haven't heard any. So I would hope as a community that we have the endurance and the commitment to see through what's going to be a multi-year change. Nobody said it's going to take less than 4 or 5 years. Will we have the patience for that?
And I think that's an excellent point. I think, there's a whole era here of rebuild and restructure and reorg, that's going to happen to make that into a very successful model. And I don't think that happens overnight. I don't think it happens within a year. I don't think it happens within 2 years.
But every 2 years you'll have people promising you will, right?
Yeah, well, that's the political end of it. And Chris, what about you? What do you think those big challenges that have to be met and overcome?
Well, I agree with what everybody is saying here, but I think one of the biggest things that will help the district is an improvement in morale and community trust. And I know that Superintendent Mills is meeting with large groups of teachers, and he's listening to them, and he's hearing what they have to say. And I think probably the strongest meeting that he had was over at the elementary school in McKelvey Park. And he did a total about-face on that. He took it off the market and said, you know what, I made a mistake here. And he was very upfront about that. And I think that's a very encouraging sign. And I think teachers should rally around the administration. And it might be a little bit top-down, as Tom said. And that it certainly has to be when you're dealing with such systemic failures. You've got to change the whole corporate culture in the school district, and that's not easy. And obviously, you create enemies by doing that because, like you're saying, people got used to the cronyism and the nepotism, and they got spoiled, and now they're fighting back. But I think that those kind of people are probably going to continue to be a problem. But if you win the majority of teachers and in-school administrators, I think you're going to turn the ship around, and that's going to reflect in stronger test scores and better education of the students.
And I must kind of point out that I think efforts have been made to create a stronger community engagement. I think the superintendent has on many occasions done luncheons and speaking, and I don't think there's any group he hasn't spoken with or been a guest at. And I think those efforts are being made to kind of to create a greater sense of awareness of what his mission is or what his vision is. And hopefully they can be continued so there's a wider kind of thought process. Well, we're on the right track. And I think that's a whole thing about accountability and transparency is you want people to be out front of everything. You don't want anything kind of being held back, and that's, I think, what happened during this financial turmoil.
One of the things to Mills's credit is that, and I've heard from several school board members on this, is he does keep them fully informed, whereas the previous administration did not. You'd ask for documents, they wouldn't be forthcoming. Certain favored board members got them, but nobody else did, and that's just wrong. That's changed. This communication is stronger, and I think that's another encouraging sign. He's not holding anything back. Like you said, the transparency is there, and anybody who wants any documents can find them easy.
And how many times have we heard this year at a workshop, there's going to be bad news at the next meeting? At the superintendent's report, we found this, and just to prepare you. So I agree that the level of transparency that we've seen in the press has been unprecedented in this district.
And I agree with you. I think the recent thing that you mentioned, Dennis, with the fact with the bond issue that's coming up. As soon as I think the school board knew about that, they brought that to the attention of the public, which is to their credit. And I think any issue that has come up is that the school board has kind of been, the school board and the superintendent have always tried to be up front as much as possible to bring those issues rather than to trying to hold them in abeyance. And I think that's a great credit to the superintendent and the school board to be able to do that. Now, we only have a few minutes left here, and I just want to go around the table real quick and, to get those final impressions of what you think, this school district is doing and why it's so important for our community to kind of rally around and make this school district one of the best. And Dennis, we'll start with you.
I think when you look at your school district, there is always this idea of who we prepare to go to college and how well we do with their lives. But there's also a community stake that we don't always talk about. But these are the people, like Tom said earlier, they're going to be working in your community, especially the ones that don't go to college, especially the ones that, you know, are in that mid to lower tier. They're the community resource. And even if you don't have children in the school district, you know, I hear that a lot of times from retirees say, well, I pay all these taxes, I don't even have a kid here. You know what? But you still have people that graduated from these schools who are your nurses, who are your home health care assistants, who are the people changing the oil and you know, coming to fix the pipes in your house. You have a stake in this. We all have a stake in this. You know, children are a fifth of our population, 100% of our future. That's a great saying, but it's true. And you know, I think that we have to look at this and say we have to be committed to an investment, and then we have to hold people accountable. And right now, we're seeing some good results, and as long as we still are, I think we have to have support for it.
And Summer, you know, what do you think? What do you think that you want to see not only, you know, happen within the school district, but what do you see, you know, happening, you know, as a reporter that's out there every day?
The same thing that Dennis is saying. Focusing on the children, the education is very important. Supporting the community. If a half-cent sales tax issue comes up or vote, you might want to think twice about saying no, because again, that is our future. We can't say that enough. I've heard it for years, but until you're living it and you have children in there and you're seeing your students' classmates and knowing, oh my goodness, this is our future, it really is. We have to support it. We have to get the community support. And I hope to see a more positive environment. I feel like the education is hurt a little with the negativity, even with the news. You know, I cringe sometimes thinking, oh, to report another negative story. And I know we can't always be positive, we can't always be negative, and we have to tell what's out there.
Right.
But I see the morale, so I'm hoping the morale improves, because I think that does affect the education as well.
Chris, what about you? What do you think those from your perspective, you know, what do you see ahead?
Well, not to echo everybody else, but I think that the school board needs to rally around the administration and provide steady leadership. I mean, you can have dissension on the school board, which is fine, and you have a nice civil discussion, but at the end of the day, you've all got to move in one direction. And you can't just keep going off in many directions. So I see that as an important part of reestablishing the public's trust in the school district. They lost a lot of that under the previous administration with all the spending problems. And the public's not really going to approve a sales tax increase under those circumstances. And I agree with Summer. I think that's very important, and it would put Manatee on a stronger competitive level with Sarasota, because their people invest in their schools.
That's true.
Manatee has refused to so far. But I think that once the administration establishes a track record of success and budget awareness and strength, then maybe they can come out and say, hey, you know what, let's invest a little more. We're improving on our education standards, but we can really kick it up if we put more into it.
Tom, final word.
All right. Unlike my young colleagues here, I've got grandsons in the schools, so I want them to graduate and be sound young fellows. I want the teachers in the school building people, and I keep saying this, I want them to feel engaged, like what they say matters, or is at least being heard. I want the administration to hold itself accountable.
Right.
I want the private sector to really step up in a big way, and with money and with resources and with leadership, because I think if you don't have that, then politicians don't listen. They don't listen unless people of influence are influencing them. So I think that needs to happen in a very constructive way.
Thank you, and thank all of you. Now, unfortunately, we're out of time for this premiere edition of Education Report. I want to thank all of our panelists, Tom Tryon, Summer Smith, Dennis Maley, and Chris Willey, for taking the time out of their very busy schedules to participate in this valuable discussion. Your insight and knowledge was very informative. Thank you. There have been significant and substantial improvement in our school district over the last 12 months, but the course for continued success still lies ahead. And it is our intention in future editions of the Education Report to talk with administrators and board members, staff, faculty, parents, and other stakeholders as we discuss one of the most important assets in our community, our school system. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Education Report.